Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to the first Safina Society podcast. My name is Mu'een. I'm one of the students here at Safina Society, and I'm here with my teacher, Dr. Shadi Al-Masri. And today we're going to be having a light conversation. Before we get started, I'd like to have Dr. Shadi give a small introduction to himself and a little bit about Safina Society. So grab some coffee, grab some tea, and why don't you join us for some light conversation today. So inshallah, here's Dr. Shadi.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, Allahumma salli wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Well, I'm originally from New Jersey, and I started seeking knowledge probably when I was pretty young, 12 and 14. Some mashayikh came, and I started very lightly, but I was very interested in the lifestyle of scholars from a very young age, and then eventually at around 17, 18, started studying and didn't look back. And you're always continuing to study. The resources weren't much, so even until now, I'm still, studying. I have teachers once and twice a week with whom I still continue studying. In 2012, I came to the New Brunswick Islamic Center, start teaching, and really what I wanted to do is have an institute for traditional Islamic knowledge. So they were generous enough to allow me to incubate Safina Society, which is our organization, inside of NBIC. So that's the situation we're in right now. Safina Society is an organization dedicated to disseminating traditional Islamic knowledge live and online as well. And there have been a lot of people asking for a podcast. So I started looking into what podcasts are all about, what works, what doesn't, and here we are doing one. So inshallah, people could benefit from it.
So thank you, Dr. Shadi, for the introduction and the kind words. So inshallah, there's lots of things I'd like to talk about on this podcast, but one thing that's, for me personally been bothering me is, what can I do about my spiritual situation in terms of how I'm feeling based on recent events that have been happening in the world. So, there's just lots and lots of carnage and I would say, fitna and evil that's going on in the world, and sometimes I just feel like an emptiness inside and I don't know what to do. What do you think, how do I deal with this?
Well, firstly, the news is actually really bad. The news is really negative. The news itself is not a neutral thing. So I actually don't watch a lot of news, believe it or not. You get the BBC pop-ups. If you watch a lot of news, you're going to be very depressed. And increasingly, if you just don't mind your business, if you're involved in anything, you can get really depressed by the state of things in the world today. But Muslims, young youth amongst the Muslims, their default setting, if they start looking into things, if they're not connected to an imam or a scholar who could show them the ropes of the world, okay, and navigate the meanings of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, your default setting is going to be confused, right? It's very complicated. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, whoever lives long after me, okay, we'll see much difference. There's going to be a lot of groups. There are going to be a lot of opinions. There's going to be a lot of differences, okay, a lot of breakups between groups, a lot of disputation. So we constantly have these types of times of confusion, right? And this is why the solution to all these things is constantly going back to knowledge. And people, even that itself, the path of knowledge itself, is confusing because you're going to be told there are 3-4 paths, and each path is telling you the other is right and the other is wrong, or one is right and one is wrong, right? And they're mutually exclusive. So you're going to be further more confused. So really, if we're going to agree that knowledge is of prime import to understand the world, okay, then we have to understand how to seek knowledge. And we're going to tell you have to follow living scholars. So then we need to go further and see, well, which living scholar? There are so many living scholars. And from this, we have from the Prophet, peace be upon him, that he said, the living scholar is the one who you see him, you remember Allah Azza wa Jal. إِذَا رُؤْيَ ذُكِرَ اللَّهِ. If you see him, you remember Allah. We also know that in Surah Yusuf, it tells us, وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. Above every scholar is a greater scholar, which means the sign of a true scholar is that he has teachers. He has greater teachers above him. All right, he doesn't wing it. You got a lot of people out there today, they're just winging it. They're not part of anything. They don't have teachers. They don't have mashayikh. They're not connected to any tradition of scholarship. So how do we know if their judgments are right or wrong if they don't have a teacher? Okay? How do we know anything? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. No, I agree. So, for me at Safina Society, it's been easier to come in contact with teachers and get to know more people. But, before I came here, it was very difficult to really get in touch with the right teachers and to learn the right knowledge. And I would say the majority of people today don't even know where to start, right? Where do you get the right teacher? Who do you contact? And let's say if we were to focus our, range down, let's just take the average Muslim. What is the average Muslim supposed to do?
This is a good question because how do you start? And in anything, really, just getting your foot in the door is the biggest accomplishment. I remember myself being totally confused. All right, I loved scholarship and knowledge, but didn't know that our ummah was as divided and broken up as it is, which is prophesied. So, the Prophet told us that this is going to happen, which gives a person comfort, because when you see a problem, and there you have your Prophet, peace be upon him, telling you that he's telling you that's going to happen, that means he's also giving you an antidote to it, right? A solution to it. All right, he recognizes it, so this Prophet, peace be upon him, he's not with us today, but his prophecies are living amongst us today. We see it in front of our own two eyes. So the way I began was I asked myself, what access do I have? And that is Allah Azza wa Jal. You have Allah, right? And we have a dua that is the dua that will deliver you, all right, to the scholarship that is going to be true. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'a wa arina al-batila batilan warzuqna ijtinaba. This is a dua that should be said in the last third of the night, in the prayer, in the sajda, with tadarru', with desperation, whenever a person is confused about the truth. Whenever an individual doesn't know, all right, and fitna has a couple meanings. Number one, it's temptation. Number two, it's killing, right? And the third definition of it is when the truth and falsehood are confused. Okay. When the truth and falsehood are confused, all right, and a person doesn't know truth from falsehood, at that point, that's what we call fitna. All right, we call that fitna, and this dua is supposed to clear up the fitna. On top of that, you have in the Quran, okay, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا, all right, وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ, all right, and we have this ayah which states, whoever has taqwa, Allah will show a way out for him. This is in everything, in knowledge, in wealth, in any situation. Whoever has taqwa, Allah will show him a way out. Okay, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يُعَلِّمْهُ اللَّهُ. Whoever has taqwa, right? And the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, whoever acts upon what Allah taught him, then Allah will give him more knowledge directly from himself. And that knowledge directly from himself is not anything new. It's understanding of what's right and what's wrong. Okay? Whenever you have a dilemma, what is this right or is that wrong? So most people out there, they are suffering from this and will continue, because as new events come, you get more confused by new events where there's no precedent on these events. So even the contemporary scholars will be differing. And by the way, in America, you have very few scholars. You have advanced students of knowledge, right? So even in America, don't say, oh, these are scholars. You have advanced students of knowledge. We have to recognize that. Okay, advanced students of knowledge. That means they'll be susceptible to mistakes, and they have to have teachers that they go back to. All right. As much as there's a movement now to just say, all right, let's develop our own scholarship. How are you going to develop scholarship when you don't even have scholars in the first place?
Absolutely.
You have to have. There has to be a constant go back and forth, and the advanced student of knowledge, he's going to be wise enough to recognize what part of his teacher's teachings are relevant to his location, right, and which part are absolute, right, to every location.
So could you repeat the dua for us once again?
The dua is Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa warzuqna ittiba'ah wa arina al-batila batila warzuqna ijtinaba, which means, oh Allah, show me the truth as truth, right, and bless me with the ability to follow it, and show me falsehood as falsehood, and give me the ability to avoid it. And we avoid falsehood, right? Some people out there, Islam is not a type of a free-for-all operation. If once you know that something is a falsehood, right? The proponents of that falsehood, we are taught to stop listening to them completely, right? Yani someone with a complete heresy in the deen, why? You're going to confuse yourself, right? You're going to confuse yourself. You're going to be confused, okay? And you're going to end up going in circles, okay? And if you had any other discipline, in any other discipline, you spend a long time choosing which university you go to, and then you stick to it. You don't switch every 2 years. You don't take a class here and a class there. You don't switch out after freshman year, and then after sophomore year, switch to another school. Trainers, if you're going to get a trainer, you're going to think very hard on who is the right trainer, okay? You go and spend a little time with this person, a little time with the next person, a little time with the third person, and then you figure out which trainer, right, is going to suit you, and you stick with them. The people who switch and go back and forth, these are the last people to learn, right? Or the last people to attain anything. You need consistency in all disciplines. So imagine now the most important discipline, the discipline with a lot of detail, the discipline with the most on the line. We have heaven and hell on the line, right? So a person should spend a lot of time first asking the question of from whom do we take our deen, right? What are the signs of people? We said the first sign is if you're in their presence, you remember Allah Azza wa Jal. The second sign, all right, is وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. Above this person is another scholar, which means, and above that scholar is another scholar, and above that scholar is another scholar. What do we call that? Isnad, a chain of transmission, right? He's not coming out of the blue. So this is a very important subject, the subject of who do we learn from.
Right, and not only is it important, but it's a problem that's occurred that I see regularly. So I'll give you an example. When I was in college, when I was learning knowledge for the first time, what I encountered was mediocre students of knowledge almost, but I didn't know anything. Right, I was a novice, and so when somebody would tell me something, I would take it at face value, and I would assume that this is correct knowledge. And I see this a lot when it comes to universities, MSAs, a lot of different areas. And what comes there is also almost an arrogance of knowledge and a refusal to learn from the right teachers. How would you, what advice would you give for?
There are a couple things that you touched on there, a couple of important things. The first thing is that not a lot of people are taught epistemology, which is quite simply the question of what determines truth, right? Or if you want to, even simply, some journalistic, if you want to call it, journalistic ethics or values or criterion of what is your source, right? In the court of law, if a lawyer says something, makes a claim, he's got to back it up with a source. Okay, all of knowledge is one of two things: either transmission or ijtihad, right? Transmission or a self-thought of theory, right? A theory from yourself. If it's transmission, فَالصِّحَّة, we ask as-sihha. We ask you, all right, why should we trust the person that you're transmitting from? Who did you get your information from? I teach my kids, actually. They come and they tell me things that happen. I ask them, who told you this? Oh, so-and-so on the playground. All right, we got to learn a little lesson here called who is your source, right? But that's not an acceptable source.
Right, absolutely.
So secondly, if it's ijtihad, then what's your evidence? So the first thing that I want to bring people's attention to, when you hear things about the deen, the first question to ask, who did I hear this from? Because a lot of times people make claims that aren't even true, okay? And because maybe they look like a reputable source, or we didn't even think of the concept of questioning the source. Okay, so you got to always question the source. This is number one. Secondly, is the issue of arrogance. Knowledge is as valuable as it is. It can be used as a wield. Shaitan can wield it against a person, right? And this is why in traditional Islamic knowledge, we'd never separate between knowledge and piety. All right, knowledge and the acts of ritual worship and the service of the community and the service of the family. The ulama in the past, the Sahaba, the ulama, all the people of the past, they never separated the agenda of knowledge or the institution of knowledge from the whole path of life, right, and the path of salvation with Allah Azza wa Jal. The two aren't separate. And unfortunately, the university setting does separate that, right? You can't deny that the university setting doesn't do this. The university setting, right, does not have a concept of incorporating your knowledge, of staying humble, of passing your knowledge on to others, of making sure your knowledge is of benefit for your afterlife. Absolutely. What you do with your knowledge is never even brought up, right? So this is one of the problems, is where when knowledge becomes the setting of knowledge, the actual setting of where learning takes place, tells you immediately a lot about what you're going to get as a result. So I'm actually a big believer that behaviors are determined before anything happens with just the setting, right? Just the setting of how this learning is taking place will indicate to you immediately how it can be used or misused.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned a few times traditional knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. So, I think I understand exactly what traditional knowledge is, but what's the real difference between, modern knowledge versus traditional knowledge?
Okay, that's a good question. Now, when we talk about traditional knowledge, I can tell you what I mean by it. What I mean by traditional knowledge is that which is passed on, in which there is a sacred that is recognized. The first thing in any concept of the word tradition is the word sacred. Something sacred is recognized and agreed upon and guarded. Okay? Then it's passed down. It's passed down. And the passing down of the baton, right, is as sacred as the baton itself. The way it's passed down, to whom it's passed down, the whole process. Where if we say modern, we're going to remove the word sacred, right? And we're going to replace it with the word mundane or secular. Okay, so modern knowledge looks at these sacred traditions. So if you're going to study Islam, Judaism, Christianity at a university, you are basically taking a dead corpse and dissecting it. That's what it is. It's treated like a dead corpse. Whereas, if we're saying traditional Islamic knowledge, Islam is, let's say, personified by a baton, and it is a golden baton that is handed down from one teacher to his student. He has to check his student first and make sure his student is on the right path. I've never had a teacher who has never advised me of taqwa. I've never had a teacher who never asked me how my prayers were. They always ask, are you at Fajr? Are you doing Fajr? Are you Fajr in the masjid? You doing these things? Okay. I've never had them not advise me if they see a mistake happening, right? So they are checking. It's like having you could say pure milk. You need to make sure the cup that you're pouring it into is pure. And the process of the transmission, how it's transmitted, is as valuable as the thing itself. This is what we mean when we're talking about traditional knowledge. The subject matter is sacred. We all agree upon that. The guardian, which is the scholar of that sanctity, he himself is viewed differently than any other people. Allah tells us, هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ? Are the ones who know, are they equivalent to the ones who don't know? So that person who has, Allah has entrusted him with keeping this knowledge sacred, okay, and guarding it, and spending his whole life reviewing it and studying it, and make sure he's understanding, make sure he's a sound vessel for it. He himself is a sign of Allah Azza wa Jal. This is why in traditional circles we love our sheikhs. Right? We love them. We don't go astray in our love for sheikhs. Like some, probably in this day and age it's a minority, but you do have groups out there who go astray in their love of a sheikh. We're not going astray in our love of a sheikh, right? In America, I don't think that really exists very much, but maybe it does. But our sheikh is not just a professor. He's not a professor. You're going to sit in his class with your PJs on and your feet in front of him. And whatever he says is just a guy who read a little bit more than you. That's what a professor is. He's a guy no different than you, right? In his moral and ethical character. He just read a little bit more than you, right? That's all he is. A sheikh is not. A sheikh is someone who is guarding himself because he's a vessel of this knowledge. He has to be an upright example. And I myself, every day, I look at myself and check myself, because even though I'm just a student, but I'm still passing knowledge on, and every day I look at myself, is this the behavior of someone? And you got to fix yourself, and you make mistakes, and the mistake, it's an embarrassment to make. I'm not saying mistake in knowledge, I'm saying mistakes in akhlaq, right? I've made mistakes with people, right? Been harsh with people, but I go back to myself and say, look, is that you're not this is not a university class. You just no one cares. No, people look at your akhlaq, right? People look at your character. People look at your prayer in the masjid. People look at your behavior. So teaching this knowledge, if you become a teacher in any way, shape, or form, right, in the traditional pietistic setting, you are the first person who's going to improve, because every day you got to look at yourself in the mirror and say, is this the behavior of someone who's passing on the hadith of Rasulullah? Is this the behavior of someone who's teaching people fiqh and spirituality and tasawwuf and ulum al-Quran and tafsir? And it's a contradiction. So this is the meaning of when we say traditional knowledge versus secular knowledge.
See, my thing was, right, when I was at university, and I could probably say this a lot about a lot of other people, right, the bigger concern isn't the deen, right?
Of course.
It's unfortunately that's just not on many people's minds, and the reason why a lot of people are at MSA are a variety of reasons, and the deen is really just one of those reasons.
You know who I feel benefits the most from? You know who I feel benefits the most in these MSAs is once someone has a tribulation and a trial. I look at MSAs and I see the people who have had trials and tribulations. These are the people who benefit the most, right? In college, you go into college, you get something happens, you're not used to the environment, all these things, right? And then you go into maybe a type of crisis. You're in crisis mode. You don't know who you are. You don't know what you believe, right? You're now, all these ideas are thrown at you. I see these college kids every day, and they're always looking for something, right?
Right.
And a lot of them, right, when they have especially if they have a Muslim origin to them, right, if they have Muslim families, okay, then they know where to go. So they start coming back to the masjid. They start coming back to Allah, studying the seerah of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So a lot of people who have a type of existential crisis in college, right, and they start wondering why they exist, or what are they doing, or how they're supposed to live, and they start coming back. Unfortunately, a lot of people have this, but there are people out there. There are groups fighting for your soul. There are groups fighting for your kids' souls, right? And they want you on their side, and they want your kids on their side. Everyone, you go to university, and 100 groups are going to pull you, right? So which one are you going to go to? This is why we have to have our youth have to be grounded, right? I have a class in Safina Society called Deen Essentials, and all it is preparation for the polemics, right? And the Aqidah pitfalls and what they're going to be presented in college, so that once they enter college, I want them to have seen it all. I want them to be thoroughly aware of what kind of proofs their philosophy teachers are going to try to bring them against God. All right, I want them to be thoroughly aware of how we're supposed to handle sexuality. Right? How are we supposed to handle the questions of sexuality? I want them to be able to dice it up in nuanced shades, right? So that they can not look like blockheads, right, and not lose their deen at the same time. All right. So out in college is, if your kids are not educated in the deen before they go to college, right? If you relied on your local Sunday school, even your Islamic school, all right, you might be in for a little bit of surprise. They're going to be in for a surprise, and you might be in for a surprise of the result. Because college is, you got 100 groups out there trying to pull at your soul, and they want you. And we, the Muslims, have to want them more. We have more to fight for, right? And that's why I'm out there and trying to get involved in any type of media, right, and get the message out there through all the mediums.
Absolutely. And I do see you eyeing your coffee. Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're drinking today?
Muslims, they've gotten obsessed with coffee, to be honest with you. And when people say, why are you guys so obsessed? Firstly, everyone's obsessed with coffee. If you're on the eastern west coasts, the life, I guess, is so stressful. Allah Azza wa Jal gave us a little gift, right? One guy he said, why are you so obsessed with coffee, right? You don't love anything else? And he gave an honest answer. He said, honestly, I love a lot of things, but most of them are haram. Okay? Right? So, I mean, that's what it is. But you got to be careful. We don't like any type of addictions, especially if we're people of fasting. If you fast, you can't be addicted to anything, right? In Yemen, Coffee, the first people who discovered it were actually Muslims in Yemen. And there is a dispute that some people say the Ethiopians are fighting for it, the Yemenis are fighting for it. Yemen was relevant in world history for about 90 years when they had coffee and no one else had it, right? The Ottomans, maybe it was a little bit more. I mean, Mocha is a city. It's a port in Yemen, right? Mocha, it's a port in Yemen. And the beans, they're a little bit different. Coffee spread through the worshippers.
Is it true that it was called the Muhammadan bean? I've heard this before.
In SOAS, my professor in SOAS, he said, your first assignment is on Imam al-Haddad, is to check out every single book from the SOAS library, which is the fourth biggest library, Islamic library in the Western Hemisphere, was University of London, SOAS. He said, your job is to get every single English and Arabic historical source on Yemen and read them in the summertime. And I spent the summer, it was the summer of 2003, I went and I had probably 3 piles of books, right, around my desk, and one of them was the history of coffee, right, because the Ottomans went and fought 90 years against the Shia, the Zaydis in the north, for control of the ports. After the Zaydis fought the Ottomans for 90 years, they got very good at war. As soon as the Ottomans left, right? As soon as the Ottomans backed out of it, the Zaydis were so strong they conquered the rest of Yemen, right? And that's why Imam al-Haddad, in his lifetime, Tarim was conquered by the Zaydi Shia, and that's why he refused to be an imam, right? And that's why in the Ratib, in the famous dhikr that Imam al-Haddad compiled, he compiled things that were sort of antidotes to Zaydi, because the Zaydis were Mu'tazilites. So he has a verse in there, he says, Al-Khair wa Shar bi mashi'atillah. Good and bad come from Allah Azza wa Jal. Because the Mu'tazilite thought, rationalist thought, says that the good is from Allah, the evil is from ourselves. Right? There's a little bit of a diversion. But you got a lot of these people, they just got nuts over coffee. And it's a type of like yuppie, hippie thing, and it's one of the few things that Muslims actually have to be proud of, is that it's not even something that they have to be proud of. It grew in their countries. They didn't invent it, right? It just happened to grow in their countries. Absolutely. And it's called the Arabica bean for that reason. But coffee to me is one of the biggest ni'mas. People are so weak. The iman of people is weak. Can't even wake up. That's how weak people are. Can't even wake up. So I think that Allah gave us this as a rahmah. Huh? It's a barakah.
Exactly.
The coffee growers of Yemen, they recite du'as. They have du'as for coffee. I mean, their whole economy used to be based on coffee, right? Their whole economy was based on coffee. And it's the only ni'mah that they had down there, right? In West Africa, it's the green tea, and in Yemen, it's the coffee. So they have fatihas that they recite, right?
So another topic that I'd like to talk about before we do close here, and so I was just getting the word out that we were going to start this Safina podcast, and naturally a bunch of brothers asked me to talk about the topic of marriage.
Marriage?
Yes. They asked me, what's wrong with the way we conduct marriage as youth of today. And when is Safina starting a matchmaking?
Yeah, trust me. If I started a matchmaking operation, it would be very easy, right? You wouldn't have much choice. But so here's the problem is this: the problem with most youth is they do it the wrong way, right? They come to me. Firstly, it's a pattern. Every few months, I get a brother. He says it's an emergency. Oh, really? I don't even know you, right? And it's an emergency. Okay, so what is the emergency? We don't even know each other, but he's coming to me for an emergency. All right, I love a woman, but my mom said no, right? This is the thing. I love a woman, so my mom said no, but my mom said no. Okay, so he did it backwards. He fell in love with someone before thinking. And this is just common sense, right? Just common sense. If you know for sure you got to go through your parents. This is if you have parents, if you have Muslim parents. If you're a convert, you have a different story. If you're like 40 years old and not married, or you're 36, you're already making a decent salary, it's different. But if you got this young guy, his dad's paying all his bills, okay? He still goes, so he can't even go play flag football with his friends without asking his mom, right? And then he falls in love with someone before he even thinks about his parents. You don't have a crisis. You have stupidity, okay? You are not in a crisis. You are in stupidity. Your crisis is your stupidity. It's just, think about it. It's common sense, right? You know for sure that your situation will require you to go through your mom and dad. You ask them, okay, are you willing to do it by yourselves? By yourself? So no, I would never, marry without my mom's happiness and approval. Okay, so you got a good head on your shoulder from that perspective. These people raised you, they spent money on you, and they have the right to be happy at your wedding, right? So, but then you went off and developed a relationship with a woman for 5 months on the campus, right? Or online, and you fell in love and she fell in love, and then you never thought twice, all right, is this thing going to work with my family? So you want to bring two things together, but you went opposite ways, right? And now you want to bring them together. It's not going to work that way. So all I'm telling you is be logical. If in your life you need your parents' approval because you're still just a young guy, you're sort of dependent upon them. I mean, in theory, you always want your parents to be happy. But once you're 40 years old, you're a guy 40 years old or a woman 40 years old, at that point, you're already out of the nest. Your parents aren't going to be much, they're not going to micromanage your situation. But you got a 20-year-old guy or a 23-year-old girl, okay, and their parents are very involved in their lives. All my first piece of advice is, use your noggin, use your brain, and think that if they're going to be involved, then you might as well, right, consider that before you develop a relationship 5 months with someone, and then you come crying, right? And what do I do with these young people? What do? I just tell them. You knew your family's going to be involved, but you fell in love anyway without, talking to them about it, knowing that they're not going to be involved, right? So this is the first point of many different points that are practical points, right?
Absolutely, and I guarantee you that we'll have more conversations about marriage in the future, as it's a very exciting topic. But since Isha is around the corner now, and we hear the adhan, inshallah, it's about time that we wrap this up. So once I'd like to thank our listeners today, inshallah. So please join us next time for our Safina Society podcast. We'll try to be regular on this, inshallah. It was a pleasure talking to you, Dr. Shadi, and it was a pleasure hearing from you. Inshallah, could you give us a small dua before we end?
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.